So I'm now going to discuss to you Japanese literature. Japanese literature spans a period of almost 2 millennia of writing. When we say 2 millennia, that is 2000 years. And then their early works were influenced by Chinese literature, but later on they also tried to develop their own. And of course, it's not only the Chinese literature or the Eastern literature that influenced them, even the Western literature also had a great effects on their works. So the history of Japanese literature is divided into four main periods. We have the ancient, classical, medieval, and the modern. We're going to discuss that later. And then in the Japanese ancient literature, this is before the 8th century. So Japanese had no writing system of their own. So in contrast with the Chinese literature, the Chinese already had their established writing system, but the Japanese do not have their own. They have only kanji, which is a form of writing, but this is not their own. Rather, this is introduced by the Chinese people, but later on they developed Manyugana or Kana as their own form of writing. This Japanese ancient period is also considered as Nara period. They have their popular masterpieces. We have the Kojiki, which is consist of the history of Japan and mythological records. We also have Nihon Shonki about the chronicles and more accurate than Kojiki, and last is Manyoshu, which is all about the anthology of poetry. When we say anthology, it's a collection of poetry in every year. Next, we also have the Heian Period or the Classical Period. It is the golden era of art and literature. When we say golden era, the arts and literature of Japanese flourished during this period. And during this period, the tale of Genji, one of the masterpieces, is also written by Musaraki Shikebu. Next is this tale of Genji is also considered the preeminent masterpiece of Heian fiction written in the form of a novel. Other works, we have the Kokiya Wakashu and Waka Anthology by Selsho Nagon, which is all about life, and then the Pillow Book by Musaraki Shikibu. So during this period, there were no recognized poets, but most were courtiers or ladies in writing. Now we proceed to Japanese medieval period. It's the start of Japanese civil war and strife. When we say strife, a lot of evil or challenges happened in this period. This is represented by the tale of Heike, which is an epic of the struggle between Minamoto and Taira clan for the control of Japan. Writing was a mixture of kanji and kana. Buddhism and Zen ethics had great influence on this period. The themes of writing here or in this period is all about life and death, simple lifestyles, and redemptions of killing. Because as mentioned earlier, this is the start of Japanese civil war and strife. Theater plays were also introduced during this period. Example is the No Theater. No is a drama coming from or introduced by the Japanese. We also have the last period or the fourth period. We have the modern literature. It's the from 17th century up to present. This is also known as Tokugawa or Edo period. It's the rise of the working and middle classes which later evolved into kabuki. So from no theater, it evolved into kabuki theater. So we have popular kabuki dramatist here. We have Chikamatsu Monzaemon, Matsubashu, who is best known for Okunu Hosomichi, or the Narrow Road to the Far North. It is considered one of the first and greatest masters of haiku poetry. It's Macho Basho. He's the father of haiku poetry. So many other genres of literature made their debut during this period. So many other genre of literature were also born in this period. Saikaku gave birth to the modern consciousness of novel in Japan. Travelogue and comedy by Hipensa Ikbu. Ueda Akinari, modern tradition and weird fiction. Kyukoitio Bakin, fantasy, historical romance. Santo Kyoden, tales of the gay quarters until it is banned. They also have genres like horror, crime stories, morality, pornography, and wood paints. Now, what is this haiku? Haiku is unrhymed Japanese poetic form consisting of 17 syllables arranged in 3 lines having 5, 7, 5 syllables respectively. Derived from the first element of the word haikai, a humorous form of renja or linked verse poem, and the second element of the word hoku, the initial stanza of renja. So example here is fallen down and, so when you try to look at it, fallen down and, so it's only 4 syllables, but when it is translated in the Japanese language, this is actually divided into 5, 7, 5 syllables, forming 17 syllables. So the first line should consist of 5, second one should consist 7, and the last one should consist of 5 syllables. So there are other examples here. So we have, okay, first day of spring, that is 5 syllable. I keep thinking about the end of autumn, so that is 5, 7, 5. Okay, I'm sorry if there are writings here. I just got this scanned document from a co-teacher because there is no module yet for this, because it's also my first time teaching this Afro-Asian literature and they had been using this one. So we have the earliest Japanese literary workmanships. In the 8th century, we have the Kojiki, we have the Nihon Shoki, and Manyoshu. So we're going to discuss this better here in the lower part, so it would be clearer. So as I have said a while back, Japanese literature in written form from at least 8th century to AD to present. So Japanese literature is considered as one of the oldest and richest national literature, although they do not have their own in the first place. They were only influenced by the Chinese literature and the Western literature. So the literary history of Japan is simply the history of the country itself. It has been marked by alternating periods of isolation from the outside world and engagement with it. So the early Japanese literature reigns from the ancient times to late 700s. The earliest period of Japanese literature saw the gradual emergence of a body of written materials based on native songs, myths, legends, and prayers. During this early period, Chinese culture influenced virtually all aspects of court culture, including literature. For example, Chinese script was introduced in the 5th century and became the first writing system used in Japan. And then they utilized the Chinese writing system for a total of 1,000 years, but after this they also tried to develop their own. The earliest works of Japanese literature that have survived intact were sponsored by the imperial court in the 700s. We have the Kojiki, which is a record of ancient matters. Kojiki contains elements of myth, but whether it contains myth or not, this is what the Japanese believe even until now. And another chronicles that they have, or another record of history, is the Nihon Shoki, which contains the chronicles of Japan. When we say chronicles, is the logical arrangement of events in a certain country. It contains a record of sequential events. And Nihon Shoki was the first of a series of 6 imperial histories known as Rikokushi, or the 6 national histories. Now we proceed to their poetry. In the earliest period, they have Manyoshu, as I have said a while back. He has a collection of 10,000 lives. And the Manyoshu contains about 4,500 poems, most of them composed in the Nara period. So, this text also shows the development of poetic forms such as tanka, or a short poem is structured around alternating lines 5 and 7 syllables. The tanka has 5 lines with syllable pattern 5 7 5 7 7, resulting in a poem of 31 syllables. So it is different with haiku because haiku contains only 17 syllables. In short, if you try to attach haiku and make it a longer poem, it is transformed to tanka. Next, we proceed to the second period. We have the Heian Period, which lasted from 794 to 1185. So, in 794, the imperial court moved to Heian-kyu, present day as or known as Kyoto, where it remained until 1868. This period from 794 to 1185 is also known as the Heian Period. So, as I have said a while back, during this period, the Japanese call this as the golden era because the arts and literature flourish very well in this period. They have the new literary developments, which is considered as the most significant development during this period, which is of course influenced by Buddhism. And their poetry during this period is much of Japan's political power passed into the lands of one clan. So during this period, the emperors commissioned the compilation of 21 official poetic anthologies, works that were considered the main repositories of the poetic tradition. The first of this, we have the collection of ancient and modern poems. And the preface of Kokin Wakashu is considered the first significant work of Japanese literary criticism. It's actually written by Tsurayuki. They also have their prose during this period. During this Heian period, several genres of prose writing emerged and flourished, including diaries, short tales called setsuwa, longer narrative tales, zoihitsu, non-fiction collection of brief stories. And we also have here the writers who were familiar with court life produced narrative tales about court society. We have Ise Monogatari, who wrote the tales of Ise in 9207. We have the most renowned Heian narrative tale, which is the court romance of Genji Monogatari, or the Tale of Genji Mai by Murasaki Shikibu. The major author in Zoihitsu genre was Sei Shonagon. His masterpiece is Makura no Soshi, or in short, it is the Pillow Book. Now we also have the Kamakura Period from 1185 to 1333. It's the gradual weakening of the authority of the Heian court led to a period of increasingly widespread turmoil and a shift of power from court aristocracy to a class of warriors based in the provinces. These warriors were known as samurai. In 1185, military commander named Minamoto no Yoritomo had established a military government in Kamakura, far from imperial capital in Kyoto. So parang nagkaroon ng rebellious movement. The Kamakura shogunate assumed military control of the country, although the imperial court retained much of its prestige. So there is already a war or a conflict between. Now, what is the effect in literature? They have their poetry. Tanka poetry, the 31-syllable, 5-line form developed very early in the Japanese literary tradition and experienced a new burst of energy and creativity during the Kamakura period. The leading poet, we have Fujiwara Toshinari, called Shunzei. He depicted natural scenes with symbolic overtones. He also spoke for the influential ideals of mystery and death, and sabi, which is an evocation of beauty, of austere. When you say austere, it's simplicity and even desolate landscapes. So when you try to look at it, it's all about life and death, mystery, desolation. So it's a product of war. Next, we have in their other genres. Other earlier forms survive into new era, including Setsuwa collections such as Uji Shoi Monogatari, a collection of tales from Uji, diaries of court ladies such as Izayoi Nikki, or the Diary of the Waning Moon by the nun Abutsu and Towa Zugatari, The Confessions of Lady Niho by Gofu Kakusa in Niho. So, next period, we have Muromachi period from 1333 to 1603. The Mongol Empire attacked Japan in 1274 and again in 1282. Weakened by these attacks and by internal dissension, the Kamakura shogunate collapsed in 1333. It was replaced by new shogunate founded by the warrior Ashikaga Takauji. This new shogunate was based on Moromaki district of Kyoto. So lumipat na sila ngayon. It's no longer far from Kyoto. They are already in the district of Kyoto. The resulting close contact between the warriors and court aristocrats helped shape cultural development in this era. So this paved way to the creation of new literary forms that combined elements from high culture of aristocrats and samurai and the culture of lower classes. So as I have said a while back, samurai are warriors. Next, we have in their literary pieces, we have the no drama. Its a new tendencies were most apparent in the evolution of no drama, which developed under patronage, monetary and political support of the Ashikaga shoguns and other samurai, and through the guidance of playwright and performer Kanyami Kityosogu and his son Ziyami Moto Keiyo. It's a profound dramatic art, and a similar process of refinement took place in Kyojin. The comic interludes performed as companion pieces to No in Kyojin. Non-heroic characters, mainly of lower social rank, appear in everyday situation. They also have Renja. It's a link verse, was an offshoot of Tanka that had been practiced for generations as an informal amusement. So it's for entertainment. Now, a poet can create renja by producing or introducing a 3-line opening, and another poet would add a 2-line continuation. Still, another poet could then add a new 3-line phrase that linked to the themes previously introduced, followed by 2-line verse, and then a cycle would continue. So a renja produced for ceremonial occasions could be as long as 10,000 lines. So it's very long because there are a lot of poets being involved. So they try to continue. Say for example, magsusulat si Poet 1, itutuloy ni Poet 2, itutuloy na naman ni Poet 3, but still focusing on a single theme. Next, we also have here Renja flourished in 1400s when it emerged as a major verse form with its own sophisticated aesthetics and patronage. Next, we also have military tales. The continuing popularity of military tales in the Muromachi period reflected the dominance of the samurai and the continuation of warfare and unrest. Most of these tales were written by multiple anonymous contributors over a period of years. So examples, we have the Chronicle of the Great Peace, the story of Yoshitsune, the tale of Zoga brothers, and many others. We have now the Tokugawa Period. Tokugawa period spans from 1603 to 1868. So during the second half of Muromachi period, the authority of the shogunate lessened and local warlords vied for power. These developments resulted in almost continual warfare and conditions of near anarchy. So medyo nananalo na ngayon ang aristocrats opposition. The arrival of Portuguese traders and missionaries starting from 1543 also unsettled the political situation. Soon, other Europeans arrived, bringing Christianity and technologies such as firearms. So, in the late 1500s, a succession of three warlords, we have Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu restored Japan's national unity and order. Now we proceed to Genroku period. It's the first great flowering of this new culture occurred during the early Tokugawa period known as the Genroku period. It's from 1688 to 1704, and during this time more and more Japanese learned to read, and the growth of mass production printing helped increase access to familiarity with literary text. And one of the most significant literary forms was haikai. It's a variety of linked verse that developed as an offshoot of the renja form. And we also have here the haiku. So Basho was also renowned for his travel accounts. So we have discussed that kanina. Next, we have another division of Tokugawa period, the late Tokugawa period. In the latter half of Tokugawa period, the center of cultural activity shifted eastward from Kyoto and Osaka to Edo, the seat of the shogunal government. During this time, many major works were produced and new genres were developed. We have the kabuki drama. It continued to become popular. We have the gesaku, or the playful prose compositions. They were also being produced during this time. Now we move on to the modern period. This is from 1868 up to present. So in the mid-1800s, the political institution of the Tokugawa shogunate weakened. So it's now the aristocrats ruling the Japanese people. This process accelerated markedly after 1853 when American naval expedition appeared in Japanese waters and demanded an end to the policy of diplomatic and commercial seclusion that Japan had followed for more than 200 years. So it's the American people who helped the aristocrats group. Facing the Westerners' military and technological superiority, the shogunate could not resist these demands. However, the signing of several treaties with Western countries in 1850s undermined the shogunate's authority and intensified the long development discontent with the rule of the shoguns among pro-imperial nationalists. In 1868, coalition of pro-imperial samurai in western Japan overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate, ushering the modern phase of Japanese literature, which is considered as Meiji Restoration. So, tuluyan nang natalo ang mga Tokugawa shogunate. So, ang counterpart ng Tokugawa shogunate in Philippines are those NPA. So we have here the Meiji period or Meiji period. The Emperor Meiji ascended to the throne just as these political changes were occurring. At the same time, Japan's imperial capital moved from Kyoto to the former shogunate capital of Edo. So since the shogunates were already defeated, the imperial government or the imperial figures moved to Edo, which was renamed in Tokyo. So their literary pieces, we have their fiction. So they already have fiction such as novel. It's long considered one of the less prestigious forms in Japan and gradually rose after 1868 to the central literary position that it occupied in the West. So it also began publication of Ukigumu, Drifting Cloud, and they were hailed as the first successful modern Japanese novel. We have here the two most renowned fiction writers in the Meiji period. We have Mori Ogai and Natsumi Soseki. These two authors studied in abroad in their youth, Ogai in Germany and Soseki in England, and then they become well-versed in Western literary developments. We also have here another development marked in Meiji period, the emergence of influential naturalist school. So, European naturalist writers aim at an objective depiction of life. When we say naturalist, they're going to naturalist school. These are institutions that support writing literary piece, which is all about the naturalism of life, what they see, what they observe, what is the social and economic environment. So, something like that. Next is the reaction against naturalism. So, despite the popularity of naturalism, writers such as Soseki, Ogai, Nagai Kafu, and Tanizaki Junichiro offered alternatives. So, these writers valued beauty, imagination over confessional realism. So, they oppose naturalism, although they did not totally oppose it. They just suggested that they could also integrate imagination rather than pure focusing on what is reality. Next is the poetry and drama. So, since the period is transforming into modernization, their literary piece in terms of poetry and drama also modernized. We also have here the era of the World Wars, 1912 to 1945. The death of Meiji Emperor in 1912 marked the close of Japan's initial period of modernization. So when the Emperor Meiji died, so it stopped the modernization of Japan. And of course, because of that, naturalism lost some of its momentum during the Taisho years. So instead, a thinly fictionalized autobiography form called Shishosetsu dominated the fictional landscape. We have the Showa period, another emperor. So the Taisho emperor died in 1926 and his son Hirohito became emperor. Hirohito adopted the name Showa, which means enlightened peace for his reign. So in literature, several new movements rose rapidly in late 1920s. The Proletarians, a group of writers committed to using their work to advance the revolutionary agenda of Marxism. It achieved a brief but spectacular prominence in these years. Next, we have the post-World War II. The Japan's defeat and unconditional surrender in 1945 brought World War II to an end. The ensuing 7 years of American occupation brought sweeping changes to virtually all aspects of Japanese life. Aftermath of war or effects of war, we have the immediate post-war years, a new personal freedom, and the compromise of peaceful, democratic society coexisted with deep despair caused by wartime devastation. And the previously suspended publication of Tanizaki's Sasamiyuki was finally released. We also have a series of younger writers capture the spirit of times by striving to come to terms with the drastically changed social conditions. The novel Shayu, The Setting Sun, No Longer Human. We have The Idiot. We have On Decadence. So in the closing days of World War II, the United States dropped atomic bombs on two Japanese cities, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 100,000 people were killed or missing as a direct result of bombings, and the attacks prompted many documentary and literary responses. Example of literary piece created is Black Rain. We also have The Thousand Cranes. We also have The Sound of Mountain. We also have The Waiting Years, Masked. So those are the literary pieces written. Now Japan entered a period of recovery which is called the New Directions, and then sustained rapid growth after 1950. During this period, the sense of urgency that marked the immediate post-war years gradually dissipated. Many writers seek a happy medium between serious and popular literature in the form of shukan shushetsu, or in-between fiction. So the writings that were produced were the Sea of, example is The Sea of Fertility, written in 1972 to 1974. So that is all about the Japanese literature. I hope you try to make a summary on the discussion. So we skip some of the details because it is very long, and of course it's just a story or a chronicle of what happened in Japan. We just tried to discuss the most essential ones. Thank you so much, and please have a summary in your notebook.